I want to tell you about a billboard. I had one put up, a real one, in the neighborhood where the kids I was serving lived. Big, visible, my nonprofit's name on it. At the time, I told myself it was about awareness, community presence, letting people know we existed. But when I look back now, honestly, it wasn't for them. It was for me. And that one admission unlocks everything I want to talk about today. Welcome to EQ Unlocked. I'm Matthew F. Stevens, trauma-informed practitioner, founder of the Operational Regulation Systems, and someone who spent the better part of 2 decades learning things the hard way so I could eventually hand you the shortcut. Today we're going to talk about ignorance, not the kind that comes from lack of information, the kind that comes from too much comfort. There's a tax on that, a real one, and most leaders are paying it every single day without ever seeing the invoice. By the end of this episode, you're going to understand exactly what that tax looks like inside your operation and what it's been quietly costing you. Let me take you back. I founded a nonprofit, 3 counties, kids ages 11 to 17, kids who have been passed around, talked about, and written off more times than anyone could count. And I poured everything into it. I mean, everything. I had a billboard put up, a real one. It was big, right in the neighborhood where they lived. I stacked watches, actual watches, to hand to the kids the day they hit a milestone that nobody else ever acknowledged. Not a system, not a strategy, just something that came naturally the more I had to give. Something they could hold, something they could look at on a hard day and remember they were capable of more than anyone ever told them. I want to tell you about one of those kids. I'm going to change some details because protecting him matters more than his story does. But everything that mattered about what happened is true. I'll call him Tyler. Tyler was being raised by his grandparents. His family situation wasn't the kind anyone writes a clean case file about. And everyone around him expected the same thing from him that they expected from every other kid in his position. Go to school, listen, do what you're told. That wasn't Tyler. And here's what almost nobody understood about him, including the adults who were supposed to be helping him. It wasn't defiance. You see, Tyler had learned the hard way that trusting people was dangerous. So he didn't. Not because he was broken, because he'd been taught over and over that trust was the thing that got you hurt. You can't parent your way through that with consequences. You can't program your way through it with a curriculum. The system around him expected compliance from a kid whose entire nervous system was built around protection. Of course it didn't work. It was never going to work. And this kid is now in your workforce. But one night, everything changed. It was New Year's Eve. My phone rang, and it was Tyler. And unfortunately, he was sobbing. Not upset. He was sobbing. He had just had an explosive argument with his grandma, and he was about an hour away from me. I got in the car. When I pulled up, he was sitting in the front yard, in the dark, still crying. And I sat down next to him. I didn't lecture him. I didn't try to fix it in that moment. I just stayed. And somewhere in that hour, sitting in the yard, Tyler let me see him. Not the version of him he had learned to perform or disappear or shut down into. The actual kid underneath. The kid underneath it all, who had been protecting himself for so long that he didn't know any other way to exist. That was the moment I knew something in him was ready to become someone different. I gave him a watch that week, not because he had finished a program or hit a checkbox on somebody's treatment plan, but because he let someone in. Because for the first time, trusting a person hadn't cost him anything. That, to me, was a milestone, the biggest one there is. Here's the part of the story most people will never hear, because most people lose track of kids like Tyler the moment they age out of the program. Years later, Tyler found himself in a moment almost everyone in his life would have bet against. He was provoked, deliberately, aggressively, in a way designed to make him explode. The exact reaction, the courts, the caseworker, everyone watching his file had quietly expected from him his whole life. People were watching. It got talked about. And he didn't explode. He stayed regulated. He stayed present. He did the one thing his entire life and his entire file said that he wasn't capable of doing under pressure. That's not luck. That's not a kid who got lucky one time. That's years of work holding under the exact same kind of pressure it was built for. The watch wasn't a trophy. It was proof of something that was already true. Sitting in a drawer, waiting for the moment it would actually get tested. You see, I threw parties. I had backpack giveaways. I had community events. We held events where kids came in and got their haircuts for school. We had backpack giveaways. I was in. I was fully in. The way you're only in something when it's feeding a part of you that's been hungry for a long time. From the outside, it looked like a mission. Then danger came from people closer than I had expected. Again, I'm not going to walk you through the details. Some things stay mine. But I'll tell you the moment that mattered. I was the one who had to decide. Not someday, not eventually, right then. And I decided the kids mattered more than the thing I'd built. So I closed it. No press release, no farewell tour. Just a man who had put his whole identity into something, choosing to end it because the alternative was pretending I could still keep people safe when I knew I couldn't. And Tyler, and every kid like him, is exactly why I couldn't just walk away and call it a loss. That closure is the reason for ORS and NAWS existing at all. Here's what I want you to hear clearly. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't incompetent. I wasn't a bad leader. The billboard, the watches, the parties, that wasn't dysfunction. That was a man giving kids something nobody had ever given them. Out of a need in himself he couldn't yet name. But both those things were true at one time. It was real generosity, and it was also me trying to feel like somebody. I didn't see the second part until years later. That's not a character flaw. That's what unregulated nervous system does. It builds, it gives, it shows up every single day. And it does all of it without ever asking what's actually driving it underneath. The closure wasn't because the model failed. The model didn't fail. I made a decision in a single moment to protect the kids over protecting the thing I'd built. And that's the hardest kind of leadership there is. But here's the tax I paid that I didn't have to pay. I spent years not understanding why I'd built it the way I did, not understanding what I was actually running on. That ignorance about myself, about what was driving me, that's the tax. Now let me ask you something, and I actually want you to sit with this before you move past it. What's driving you to keep launching the same incentive programs that don't move your numbers? Not what you'd say in a leadership meeting. What's actually underneath it? Because if you run the same playbook 3, 4, 5 times, a different theme, same structure, and the metrics haven't moved, that's not a strategy problem anymore. That's the same thing I was doing with the billboard. Something in you needs that program to exist, whether it works or not. I'm not saying that to shame you. I'm saying that because I lived it, and I didn't see it until the organization I built around it was already gone. And now look at your floor. How many people down there are doing exactly what I was doing? Not because they don't care, and they might care deeply, but because nobody, including them, has ever examined what's actually driving the behavior underneath the performance. And think about the incentive programs you've launched, the pizza parties, the Employee of the Month plaque, the contest, the bonuses, the perks. What are they actually designed to do? Make people feel seen, feel valued, in an environment where most of them have never felt either. None of that is wrong intent. All of it is genuine. But caring isn't the same as knowing. And not knowing, when the data to know is sitting right in front of you, at some point, that stops being a gap and becomes a choice. Let me give you something that happened a little bit more recently. Not a case study, not a hypothetical. Something I watched happen with my own eyes on a real floor a few weeks ago. There's a man I work alongside. I won't say where, but matter of fact, I won't even say his name because this isn't his platform. It's mine. And I'm not going to spin his story without protecting him. But he'd been quietly applying ORS to his own cause and to his own life on his own. Nobody assigned him to do it. Nobody on his team knew. Nobody in leadership knew. It was just something that I saw he could benefit from, so I gave it to him. And the other day, as we were sitting there, somebody from quality assurance came up to him and completely independent of anything that I said or did, she pulled him aside and gave him real recognition, specific, documented praise for how much he'd improved. His tone, his de-escalation, the way he was handling his calls that used to really throw him off. Nobody in that room knew ORS was the reason. They just saw the result. And that's the part I want you to sit with. That wasn't me selling something. That wasn't a pilot program with my name attached to it and a stake in the outcome. This was one person applying regulation principles quietly, an entirely separate team independently verifying that something real had changed in how he showed up. That's what proof actually looks like. Not a testimonial I asked for, a result somebody else noticed without being told what to look for. And now multiply that by your floor. Not one guy doing this on his own, off to the side with nobody coaching him through it, but an entire team with a system actually built into how the operations run. That's not hope. And that's a baseline you could be standing on right now. Let me give you a number. Before I do, hold on to that guy on the floor for a second. His name is Elijah. Because here's what makes a story matter beyond being a nice moment. If regulation can change how one person performs under pressure, enough that an outside team notices without being told why, that same shift scales. It's not magic. It's not personality. It's a mechanism. And mechanisms can be installed deliberately instead of waiting for someone to stumble into them on their own. 8 hours. That's what you're paying for every single day per employee. Here's what workplace research consistently finds. Most knowledge workers produce somewhere between 2.5 hours to 4 hours of genuinely focused, productive work inside that 8-hour window. Let that sit for a minute. 2.5 to 4 hours in an 8-hour window. The rest disappears. It disappears into meetings, into interruptions, into context switching, into administrative tasks, emails, breaks, and yes, some avoidance. That's not laziness. That's human capacity operating inside a normal organizational day. Now stack dysregulation on top of that. A nervous system that walked in already tight from yesterday. Team that's been managed with pizza parties, plaques, instead of anything that actually addresses what's underneath. You're not losing a little efficiency on top of a healthy baseline. You're losing capacity that was already there to begin with. And here's the part that should actually concern you. This isn't theoretical. There's a documented case not far from where I grew up that ABC's 2020 covered. A wrongful conviction, years of warning signs nobody acted on in time. When it finally came to light, 2 separate settlements followed. One for $1.5 million, another for $2.2 million. Combined, $3.7 million public record. Not because no one saw the problem, but because seeing a problem and actually knowing what to do with it are two very different things. That's the tax. Not hypothetical, a real number, paid by real institutions, because ignorance was treated as neutral when it was never neutral. It was a decision made over and over to not look closer. I want to address something directly because I know some of you are thinking it. This sounds like therapy, like we're about to start talking about feelings in the middle of a shift. That's not what I do. And it's not what this is. The operational regulation system is not a wellness program. It's not a workshop. It's not a training you sit through, once and just forget by Friday. It's actual infrastructure. It's the thing you install in an operation. So the nervous system underneath your entire workforce stops being the invisible variable deciding whether your metrics move. Regulation is the foundation. Awareness is what makes it possible. Choice is what your people start making differently once they actually have access to it. Regulation, awareness, choice. RAC. When that sequence gets embedded into how operation actually runs, the numbers move. The behavior is finally coming from a different place. So here's the uncomfortable part. If you're leading an operation right now, a call center, a healthcare floor, anywhere people are under sustained pressure, and you haven't examined the emotional state of that operation at a systematic level, you're making the same choice I made. Not because you don't care, because caring isn't the same as knowing. But I'm going to leave you with a challenge, because a challenge without a next step is just guilt with good production value. Here's what I actually do if I were sitting where you're sitting. I wouldn't ask you to overhaul your operation tomorrow. I'd ask you to find out, with real numbers, what this is already costing you. Not a hypothetical. Your floor, your turnover, your handle times. That's the entire purpose of the ORS snapshot. It's not a sales pitch dressed up as a tool. It's 3 minutes. It's free. And it gives you a floor level number for what dysregulation is costing you for your specific operation right now, today. And if that number is uncomfortable, that's the data telling you something a pizza party never could. The ignorance tax is real, but it's not permanent. The moment you decide to actually look at what's driving the behavior in your operation, not just the behavior itself, everything changes. Because now you're solving the right problem instead of managing the symptom. I built ORS because I needed it. Not for the organization I eventually worked with, for myself. First, it's the system I wish existed back when I was pouring everything I had into something I couldn't hold the weight I was putting into it. Go to MatthewFStevens.com/ORS cost snapshot. Run your numbers. 3 minutes, no cost, no commitment. If the number surprises you, that's not me trying to scare you into something. That's just what happens the first time you stop being ignorant of your own operation. Because the first step out of ignorance is always the same. You decide to know. I'm Matthew F. Stevens. This is EQ Unlocked. I'll see you next time.